It felt like extortion. Like the whole thing felt really slimy.
High dollar payouts, homes held hostage. This is impacting sales and rental prices across the District of Columbia. And the News 4 I team has uncovered loopholes in an old D.C. law that is now being exploited for profit.
Investigative reporter Jody Fleischer shows us why experts say it's driving up the housing costs for the rest of us.
Whether you're a homeowner or a renter, a buyer or a seller, you need to know about TOPA.
Anywhere in the city can be impacted by TOPA.
All you need to do is live in a DC rental that's going up for sale.
I've heard of payments of tens of thousands of dollars.
Enacted in 1980, the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act was designed to keep longtime renters from being forced out of gentrifying neighborhoods or to help them afford a new lease in a different building. It basically gives renters the chance to buy their place first, but the News 4 I team found even when they don't want to or can't afford to buy, they can rake in big bucks by selling those rights.
How can you not love a red door?
Meet Clara, a first-time homebuyer who fell in love with this Capitol Hill row house. It needed major work, but came complete with stained glass windows, a cute little yard, and a renter living in the basement.
And we kept being told, oh, don't worry about it.
The sellers had been asking for the renter to sign a TOPA waiver since they first accepted Clara's offer.
They were offering her $10,000 to sign the waiver, and so we felt like, you know, who wouldn't take that kind of a deal?
Well, it turns out the renter got an even better deal by selling her TOPA rights to someone else, a higher bidder, the day before Clara was set to close. That bidder got to buy the house instead.
I mean, it was really frustrating. I had a legal agreement with the seller to buy the place, and I felt like it was kind of being ripped out from under my feet.
Tenants have now become more savvy about taking advantage of the letter of the law.
DC Realtors Association President Colin Johnson says it's happening more and more. Buyers and sellers forced to pay renters to keep them from using TOPA to hold up a sale.
I've heard payoffs as high as $50,000 to $100,000, depending on what the circumstances are. And that's for single-family homes.
The News 4 I team found your name doesn't even have to be on the lease to get paid because DC's TOPA law doesn't define what a tenant is.
If you had your live-in significant other consider this property their home, they're also a tenant.
So a healthcare worker who cared for grandma for a few weeks, the summer intern who rented a room in your house, even a squatter can stop your sale until you pay. Real estate attorney Joy Siegel says she's seen payouts long after leases were up and tenants had left.
The title insurer required us to contact everyone within the last 12 months. Some people had already moved out of the country.
But renters still occupying the home while it's on the market are in the power position.
They can post it online and say, hey, anybody want to buy my row house that I live in? I have the right to assign this to someone else.
It felt like she had me hostage.
While TOPA was passed to keep people from being booted from their homes, Clara says she was allowing the renter in this row house to stay. But in the end, the renter forced Clara to leave instead.
I was up for collaborating with her, but instead what I got back was, what's your best offer?
I've been accused of hostage taking. I don't like that term.
But Andrew McGuire acknowledges he holds up home sales for a living.
Well, I'm not trying to make the sale fall apart. I'm trying to change who the buyer is.
So he can get a cut of the payout. It's become his entire law practice. He's got a TOPA mobile. He's even trademarked the phrase "got TOPA" because renters who do can get paid.
TOPA's huge right now, and I would estimate that it's essentially about $100 million a year industry that is virtually untapped.
It stands for the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, designed to keep renters from being displaced by giving them the right to buy the place they live when it goes up for sale. If they don't want to buy, they can instead sell those rights to someone else. And it doesn't have to be the buyer the seller wanted.
You want the buyer to walk away. If the buyer walks away, it clears the deck so that the tenant can assign his rights to a developer who will come in, and then the seller has no one else to sell to.
I actually lost one buyer so far.
Yolanda Smith had never heard of TOPA when she bought this home in 2012. Then she decided to rent it out a year later when she moved to care for her mother. Now she's been trying to sell for more than 6 months.
It's like someone actually sticking a gun to your head and actually saying, you know what? Until you pay me exactly what I want, your home and your life will be held hostage.
McGuire says he's just trying to get his clients the most money for their rights.
Yeah, I mean, I have several cases where there's over $100,000 being paid for rights.
He tracks his clients down from a list the district posts online after sellers give notice.
I knock on doors. I try to meet every tenant in every property where there's a TOPA notice.
Almost like ambulance chasing, only they're chasing tenants.
Real estate attorney Joy Siegel says it's gotten so bad some title insurance companies won't let you close without a TOPA waiver from every tenant who's lived in the building going back a whole year, just in case a TOPA chaser finds them.
They learn later that they didn't get their TOPA right, and they come to the lawyer and say, well, what can I get out of it?
To complicate it even more, the district's law doesn't define tenant as being on the lease or paying rent. You just have to have stayed there.
My view of the law is that tenant would be anything short of a trespasser.
But his view of the law has the D.C. Association of Realtors questioning how it's being used.
Is it extortion? Call it what you will, but I think more importantly, people are taking advantage who might not be the intended beneficiaries of it.
McGuire says TOPA allows the people most affected by the changeover of affordable housing to have a direct say in what happens to them.
Tenants have not only the right to buy the house, they have the right to essentially sell the house. And this is the magic of TOPA.
Now, depending on who you ask, Airbnb guests, even if they just stay for a few days, could be able to hold up home sales and demand money just like a regular renter. With prices high and inventory low, properties in Washington, D.C. don't stay for sale for long.
It's tight. I mean, in the rental market and in the resale market, it's very tight.
Jacqueline Battistini sees it every day in her job as a real estate agent. She's also become a real estate investor, but some of her rentals aren't on the traditional market.
I do know that people are starting to explore Airbnb more frequently because there's less risk involved.
She's talking about the risk of a rental ransom. Tenants using an old D.C. law to hold up sales for a huge piece of the profits. One expert calls the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, or TOPA, a $100 million a year industry.
It's all I do. I've spent a year building this business.
Attorney Andrew McGuire drives around in a TOPA mobile, recruiting renters as clients, trying to get them the most money by selling their first right to buy when the property they rent goes up for sale.
Tenants have not only the right to buy the house, they have the right to essentially sell the house. And this is the magic of TOPA.
The News 4i team found sales all over the district have been held up by tenants delaying the process while they sell their TOPA rights to the highest bidder. Then that bidder gets to buy the house, even if the seller already had a deal with someone else.
TOPA's huge right now.
And it's no secret for sellers. Take a look at this recent listing advertising 6 bedrooms, 4 baths, and that all units were rented Airbnb, so no TOPA required.
They can make roughly the same amount of money, and should they decide to sell or change their minds about what they're doing, they're not putting themselves at that risk of being held hostage.
Or are they? McGuire says since D.C. law doesn't define what a tenant is, Airbnb guests may qualify, even if they only stayed a few days.
My view of the law is that tenant would be anything short of a trespasser. So anybody out there in Airbnb, if the property is on the market and you're there, call me.
The TOPA law was designed to protect affordable housing and keep renters in their homes by giving them the chance to buy. Airbnb says it's absurd to think tourists renting a room short-term would qualify. The chair of the D.C. Council's Housing Committee agrees.
We usually do not think of a short-term visitor as having TOPA rights. That was not the intention of the law.
But she's heard of it happening. And in fact, the seller from this property told the News 4i team his buyer decided to pay the Airbnb guests to sign over their TOPA rights just in case.
Well, that's why we've got to have legislation to address this matter.
Jacqueline says if they don't, more and more landlords might keep their properties off the regular rental market, lowering inventory even more.
I could see how in the future it could have an impact.
Action after a News 4 I-Team investigation into a decades-old law. The I-Team showed how the law meant to protect renters is being exploited for huge payouts and even holding up home sales.
That's right. Now a D.C. lawmaker has introduced a bill to try and fix this problem, but investigative reporter Jody Fleischer is here now with why critics say this bill doesn't go far enough? Jody?
Well, Leon, D.C.'s Association of Realtors calls this bill a baby step toward keeping tenants from holding homes hostage. Renters can already sell their right to buy the place they live, demanding tens of thousands of dollars. The new law would cap those payouts at $1,500, but only in one very narrow sliver of situations.
The Housing Committee is proposing a change.
It's a change that would be groundbreaking, and as with most housing-related legislation, likely not without a fight. But Councilmember Anita Bond says she's up for it and told her D.C. Council colleagues the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, or TOPA, has problems.
Significant controversy has arisen whether TOPA is being misused by some tenants to exact large amounts of money.
It's a controversy exposed by the News 4 I-Team last month with a series of reports on high-dollar payouts to renters who drag out home sales by refusing to sign over their rights to buy the place they live, instead selling those rights to the highest bidder.
It felt like extortion, like the whole thing felt really slimy.
Bonds is focusing her new legislation on single-family homes, like this one, where a buyer told the I-Team she lost her sale within hours of closing. The renter walked away with tens of thousands of dollars from the new buyer.
People are taking advantage of it.
The original law was designed to protect affordable housing and keep renters from being displaced by developers and gentrification.
This is our starting point. It's really to begin the dialogue.
The Bonds bill only limits payouts to renters who live in an attached property where their landlord also lives. It does not address homes held hostage by tenants who rent the entire home or part of a home where the owner lives elsewhere.
It's concerning that this was how they approached this.
The D.C. Association of Realtors wants legislation to eliminate TOPA rights in all single-family home sales.
Does this, as written, fix the problem in the single-family space?
No. I can definitively say that this does not correct. It actually would probably complicate.
The current law does not define what a tenant is, and the new bill doesn't either. TOPA doesn't require a lease or payment of rent. An intern who stayed for a few weeks, a caregiver for a sick relative, even squatters and Airbnb guests have gotten paid for TOPA rights. A whole industry of TOPA chasers has sprung up across the district, which Bond says the law never intended and she wants to fix.
It sounds like you agree that this doesn't go far enough.
Oh, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. It's the beginning of the process.
Today's hearing lasted almost all day and got pretty heated. It was initially supposed to be a very narrow proposal to change the law for things like room rentals or English basements, but the council chairman went much further, instead proposing to exempt all single-family homes, and the standing room-only crowd reacted overwhelmingly.
All right, okay, all right.
It was the only standing ovation of the day as the audience erupted, largely filled with those sporting stickers and signs urging the D.C. Council to fix TOPA.
And I understand it's the goal of the law to protect tenants, but it puts everyday people like myself in harmful situations.
Lorraine Connor wept as she told council members how she feels trapped, unable to sell the property she's owned for 25 years because the renters won't leave and she doesn't have the money to pay them.
Where am I supposed to get $30,000 to do that? And they're holding my house. I can't sell it.
The Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act kicks in when owners of D.C. property that's been rented out decide to sell. It gives the renter the first right to buy the property, but more importantly, it also gives the ability to sell that right to someone else and pocket the profit.
It does prevent tenants from being displaced. It gives them a chance to stay in that place that has become their home as well.
Opponents argued that rising rental costs make it harder for longtime tenants to relocate once they're forced out. Sometimes they can negotiate with a buyer who will let them stay or pay them large sums to leave. Advocacy groups pointed out that tenants could use TOPA payouts for things like moving expenses.
If the tenant gets money, it's not because they're being extortionist.
But most of the crowd were realtors, owners, and buyers sharing the same horror stories the News 4 I-Team first exposed in May. Renters refusing to leave, holding up home sales for months or years, demanding tens of thousands of dollars, all in the name of TOPA.
I think it can be simplified so that extortion and payouts are not a part of it.
I would not rent out a house in D.C. ever again. There must be a way to fix this timeliness so that homeowners are not held hostage.
Now, the way the bill is worded right now, it would not protect homeowners like the ones you just saw, but the language will likely change before the full council votes. In fact, the chairman told me he will push to make that happen. Jody Fleischer, News 4 I-Team.